Ok. ¿Se me escucha? Sí, me dicen que se me escucha. Buenas tardes, buenas noches a todos.
Can you hear me? Good afternoon. Thank you very much for coming. We are here in a debate that we call journalism for the common good. Before anything else, I would like to thank the Foundation, Telefónica Foundation, for organizing this event, for this special space we are in, particularly today, because I found the surprise of the National Geographic exhibition. And since 1888, beg your pardon, has been doing journalism for the common good. They began with a bulletin, and now they have 10 or 12 million readers, including Joy and Mejitas. So this is a perfect stage. Well, before we introduce the speakers, there's a hashtag, the future of the media. For those of you who want to participate in the debate in the social media, there are some instructions about the translation interpretation, because there will be 3 languages, French, English, and Spanish. And that enriches the debate, undoubtedly. I also want to thank the Telefónica Foundation for organizing this event, which is the second of a series. My name is Miguel Castro. I'm Secretary General of the Advisory Board of Conversation Spain, and my work is as project manager for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I'm a journalist as a vocation, by training, and as a profession also, for more than 20 years, and for me, this is a really important subject. So what is the premise that we would like to debate? And that is that the media, after the digital transformation, which is obvious and which is here with us, has gone through a transformation. And we want to share with you and talk with the panelists about what that transformation signifies, what is the situation of journalism right now and the media after a technological revolution that has changed the debate, the infrastructure and the different models. And this has been discussed in many different panels and by many different people. It isn't the main subject of the debate, but we won't be able to avoid that. And the media, in recent years, have also concentrated in pursuing an audience, perhaps in a bit of a desperate way, and that has affected the quality. And many media have forgotten, many journalists have forgotten the main objective of journalism and the mission of journalism. And I hope that we will be talking about that here in the next hour. And another fundamental subject, which is the third context, which I'd like to put to the debate, and that is the fall of the trust of the audience and citizens in journalism. I reside in the UK right now, and journalists we have a level of trust, and the perception of the journalist is much lower now. I don't want to compare with any other profession, because that would be unjust, but the level of trust in the media and the journalists is very low. And that is also completely compatible with the subject that we're going to talk about today, which is the service to society and for the common good, which journalism owes and has to exercise. Well, I'm going to very briefly introduce the panelists, and then they will introduce themselves with more detail. They give an initial presentation based on their experience and their knowledge and know-how, and based on the subject that we're going to be talking about today. Noemi Ramirez, Director of Products and Clients in Prisa. Noticia Rachel Albright, Director General of the Bureau for Investigative Reporting from London. Also Didier Porquerie, he's the Director General also of the Conversation in France. And Mario Tascon, who's Director of Prodigioso Volcan, the communication agency. And without further ado, we're going to talk for the next half an hour, 45 minutes, and then we'll open the floor to debate. Perhaps there'll be 1 or 2 questions for clarification, but there will be a debate. Now, Noemi, would you like to kick off? Okay, fine. Well, thank you very much for this invitation, Miguel. Also, I'd like to thank the Fundación Telefónica and the conversation, of course. I would like to share the experience of how we also see the current situation with regards to the media without wanting to pour cold water, but it is a difficult environment. It's complicated. This is not something new, specifically in our market in Western Europe, but this is one of the markets, if not the oldest in the world. And the predictions, what they say is that we have lost approximately a third of the sale of newspapers since 2013 until 2022. We will lose approximately 20% more. So in other words, what is happening is that we start from a context in which we had a business model which was very solid, with a good base, which had been unaltered over time, virtually, and for various reasons, and with technology not only, has disrupted the business models and the relations also that we have with our readers. And beyond being aware of what this imposes, and that is the need to face the digital transformation. I don't want to refer to it from the point of view of a product or discovery of new audiences and new public, because I'm aware of what you said at the beginning, but I do think that the digital transformation that we still have to deal with in the media is the path that we need to follow in order to build an economic model, a sustainable business model, and which will allow us to maintain a solid relationship, a stable and credible relationship with our readers, and also connecting with what you were saying with regards to the importance of trust. Confidence in many forums and events is said to be the new currency in our sector. I don't think that ends there. I think it's important and it's common sense to think that if we want to build a business model that is solid and robust, beyond the revenue that the advertising market can bring you, which is there, that's obvious. We also need to create a relationship which is closer, more direct, which will allow us to get to know our readers, get us to know the different types and typologies of readers that we have, and to build on that a relationship of trust and of loyalty, and to go from a model which has been very marked by the metrics of vanity and quantitative metrics, where obviously they talk about the volume of unique readers and video, and without forgetting that that is an important part that sustains revenues from advertising. We have to bring into the debate, and very especially into the Spanish market, the thoughts about more qualitative aspects. In other words, what is the time of permanence? How many times they come and read us? And all of these ideas that readers are giving us with regards to what kind of information, contents, added value services, new capacities of new functionalities that are absolutely related among each other and that are part of the product as such. This will all help us to build, or should help us to build, an alternative business model based on knowledge and a direct relationship with the reader. For me, this is the big thing that is left outstanding. With numerous exceptions, all the media, we are, let's say, some have consolidated it tremendously and at an advanced stage. Others are in the exploration phase, and this is the next frontier, I think, that we need to do in order to conquer in the environment of Spanish media. I'll leave it there now in order to allow my other colleagues to contribute. But another last thing I would like to point out is that something that perhaps we don't talk enough about it, and I think that this is tremendously interesting in the context of the media globally, and that is to back collaboration. I think in the media, one of the elements that defines us has been endogamy, a certain complacency or self-complacency when we measure our achievements, and quite self-sufficiently when we start initiatives and development of work. I think in the context which we are in, that pushes us to having to find more open formulae, more collaborative ways of working together, and also working with other third parties who exist in the global information ecosystem. There are numerous examples, like, for example, the development of joint collaboration, also with platforms, for example, and we have different visions about that. Some people feel comfortable working with them, but it is also true that as a result of the development of a collaborative with these technological platforms, you can also reach or achieve a share of development of product in an innovative way that would be difficult to achieve on your own, or completely individually, and there are examples of supporting joint editorial work, or to take on big projects in a collaborative way among media and transnational investigation or research are wonderful examples of how collaboration is possible and how it enriches us. Perfect, thank you very much. 3 subjects to explore. Then the relationship with readers, and the relationship between trust and the business model, collaboration, which is something which Didier and Rachel have a lot of experience in and a lot of success in also, and that's part of the model, and the relationship with the platforms, Facebook, Twitter, which is also fundamental. Rachel?
Un poquito sobre...
Tell us...
So good evening. I apologise that I can't speak in Spanish. Hopefully you can all understand. I'm so delighted to be here, not least because it means I've been able to leave the dark, dull skies of London behind and the dark dullness of our media at the moment, which is all about the potential implosion of our government trying to negotiate its way through Brexit. So, but here I am on a panel discussing the dark and the gloom of the media industry. It's a subject that I have spent a lot of time over the past 10 years talking about. Perhaps because I'm in the sunnier climes of this beautiful city, Madrid, I want to try not to talk in too dark terms, but to try and talk about some of the innovation and some of the really interesting things that are starting to happen in the media world that is around journalism in the public good. We've already mentioned collaboration and engagement. These are 2 areas that are really starting to be taken on board by groups of journalists, particularly in the area of investigative journalism, which is the area that I come from. I run an organisation in London called the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. We do what it says on the tin. We are totally philanthropically funded. And because of that, it means that we're not chasing clicks. We don't have to search for profit by trying to keep up with 24-hour news and bring in audiences. Obviously, we want our stories to be read. We want our stories to have a big reach. But what we most want is to have a transformation, to have an impact. And this mission-driven journalism allows us, my team, it allows them time to actually dig into subjects, to get behind the news headlines, beyond the spin and the PR of both our governments, our corporations, and the vast amounts of public relation companies that exist in the world today. So I don't want to talk too much about what we do at the Bureau, but just to give you an example of the type of work we do and how it differs from traditional media. As an example, we take on really big subjects that we feel are of vital public importance. And as I say, we spend a lot of time digging into them over months and years because we think that they don't start to engage or have an impact immediately it takes time for subjects to really embed in the public's mind. So we've covered things like targeted killing by drones. We've looked at that area for 6 years. We've been looking at the rise of antibiotic resistance, which is perhaps the biggest, or undoubtedly the biggest potential public health problem on our horizon. It's having a huge impact on the developed world. We've spent a lot of time looking at misinformation. I hate to use the term fake news, but we've looked at how the PR industry uses social media to manipulate information and manipulate news. And this type of work, as I say, takes time. And in an industry that is collapsing, the commercial model is collapsing, one of the first things that disappeared was investigative journalism, because it's expensive, it's risky, it usually involves experienced reporters. And it certainly very often doesn't deliver clicks. It might be in the public interest, but it often doesn't necessarily interest the public in the same way as a celebrity news might, for example. But what we've seen, in the first part of the decade, we saw a real entrenchment. We saw an attack on investigative journalism, an attack on public interest journalism. But what we've seen over the second half of this decade, particularly in the US, but increasingly all across Europe, is the rise of new models. And these are often small organizations. They are organizations like The Conversation, for example. 10 years ago, all the amazing information and research that was being done in our academic institutions tended to stay in our academic institutions. Now, through The Conversation, the public has access to it in a very engaging, easily digestible format. Investigative journalism as well is being done increasingly by smaller, innovative, interesting organizations like the Bureau, but there's similar organizations in Spain. Civio, for example, does some really interesting work with data. Some of the best innovative data work in Spain is done by that small not-for-profit. We've mentioned collaboration. Collaboration in the media is a bit of an anathema. It's not something we really like. We see our other media journalists and newspapers as competitors. But as a result of small not-for-profit organizations, we've seen a huge amount of collaboration across borders of things like the Panama Papers, etc. And these revealed and dug into subjects and revealed information that really would not have been possible as a result of one organization. It's only possible because dozens of organizations have worked on these subjects together. And now I think the new buzzword in our industry is engagement. How do we get to work in a circle instead of just broadcasting to our public and to our readers and thinking that we sit in this grand chamber of knowledge and we know what you want to know and we can pass it on to you in a very broadcast way? We're starting to think about a circular loop. How can we engage with our audience to understand the stories that really matter to them, to get the information from them, because our audience, after all, tend to be the people who know what's going on, or certain aspects of our audience, and then report it out to a much wider audience. And certainly within investigative journalism, we're now moving beyond collaborating with journalists to collaborating with the public and starting to think about what are the techniques and innovations we can use to start finding new information that journalists wouldn't be able to find. So there's an interesting organization in Germany called Correctiv. They've done a lot of work about trying to find out who owns their cities, which are the big corporations and the big international property conglomerates that have bought up all the buildings in their cities. In the UK, currently, the Bureau is doing a big piece of work. Our public sector has been through a really difficult time. We have no money in our public sector. We're closing down a lot of vital services. And to try and bring more money in, we're selling our parks, our school buildings, our hospital buildings, our town halls. It's very difficult as journalists to map this, but we've got a project that we're going to launch next year, which will be asking the public to help us investigate the buildings, the public buildings that are being lost in their spaces. So, all these interesting new ways of doing investigative journalism that has come about because the traditional commercial media model has been under so much pressure that we've had to find new ways and new efficiencies to get this vital information out into the public.
Thank you. Muchas gracias. Está claro que
Clearly, the subject of collaboration, new models, this is one of the subjects that we will be exploring with you later. Also, how to be constructive whilst you investigate subjects that are so hard and negative and so complicated also to unroll, like resistance to antibiotics and so forth. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Didier? I would like to, well, thank you first of all for this invitation. I would like to come back to a point mentioned by Noemi about trust, because if we want to have implication engagement, you have to have trust. How can we regain the trust of the public, of the audience in France? In the classifications of trust in jobs, journalism is very near the bottom, not far from the bottom. We are classified between bankers and real estate agents. So really, we have to be careful about that and look out for that. So how can we rebuild that trust? It's been almost 40 years that I've worked as a journalist. I began with Libération, and then I finished by as being assistant director of the Le Monde newspaper. But I've always asked myself this question: what can we do in order to build the confidence, trust with my readers, whom I want to share things? How can they have trust in me? And in fact, there are various elements that I will very quickly cover by taking the example of the conversation. The conversation, I must say, is not the solution, but it is a complementary media. It can help. And so the first element, how can we build trust? The key word is expertise. There are four elements, in fact. Because today, commentaries or opinions are all over the place. However, expertise, true expertise, not the expertise that decides what expertise is. What we see on television very often is experts, in inverted commas, who come to comment on the news, but to go and look for expertise. That's the first thing to detect it. That's the work of a journalist, to detect and find expertise. That's what we do in the conversation, to go and find and see who are the experts in a particular subject. Secondly, when I recruit and I hire journalists, I look for just two things: people who are curious and generous, really generous, who really want to share, and share as we must do today. In other words, I'm not going to stand here explaining. I'm going to sit here and tell you and recount what I found. That's in my way of doing it, and that is using words that everybody can understand. In France, we have a word that is not very well viewed, which is called vulgariser, to vulgarize, or in other words, make knowledge simple. From the Latin vulgus, which is the people, to share knowledge with the people, and in the reconquest of trust with vis-a-vis the readers, that is part of it. And we do the work of explaining, of vulgarization, and then the readers are grateful. And if there's gratefulness, there is that engagement and that commitment. And the third element is, where do you get your money from? Where is the money? And there, you know very well that many people who have lost trust in the media say to themselves, well, I don't trust media anymore because they've been bought out, or they're sold out, or both sometimes. So there, we at the conversation, we resolved the problem by being non-profit, as we say, or in Spanish even they say non-profit, but in fact, so we are totally an organization with a non-profit making organization, and we work like many other new organizations. We work with philanthropy, so that's clear, and we ask all of our experts to fill in a declaration of interest. You have the conversation Spain, and there you will see, if you look at that there, the declaration of interest, where the money comes from that has financed that research, and you can see. And last point is that the collaborative aspect. Collaborative, what does that mean? That means in working in networks, really. Today the conversation is present in 8 large regions: Australia, United States of America, Great Britain, Africa, and France, Spain, and Indonesia. And we work in a network. We share a certain number of things. I remember that when I was in Le Monde, that is where we came out with the Panama Papers, and that was the first time that Le Monde did not try to have a scoop all on its own. It was the first time. And we worked together. And we realized that had an incredible strength. In other words, all of a sudden, with people, very professional people also, who were all over Europe, US, and so forth, we could do sensational work. The collaboration, the network, the cooperation, that is the key. And furthermore, that network that builds the trust. We're not all alone. I'm not a journalist who's going to explain life to you. I'm a journalist who works with other journalists and with experts. And the work with the experts today in the world, there are 70,000 experts who work for the conversation networks, 70,000 experts who work in a collaborative way with journalists. And we are there just to convey their knowledge and their know-how, to pass it on. That's why I wanted to tell you that, because in the reconstruction of trust, it seems to me to be an essential element. Miguel, thank you. Clearly, the subject on trust is important, and perhaps we can develop that further and talk about particularly how we go from an anecdote to a structural change in the media industry, because very often we refer to the same examples time and again, and of generating confidence and generating a relationship with the audience that is very strong, that can be translated into business models. But when we go from an anecdote, when do we change from just being a story to becoming a structural change in the industry? Mario? Well, the first thing, I would like to thank the Foundation and the conversation for the invitation. I would like to go more into some of the subjects. I want to talk about the transformation for a particular reason. That is that I think that in the work, I see a lot of sectors in my work, and I provide the media. I worked there as a journalist for many years in El País and in El Mundo newspaper and others. And one of the fundamental differences when I see the transformation is the media that they haven't gone into the transformation. The bank, obliged by circumstance, has gone through a great transformation. The insurance sector also. Telephony companies are also working on it. But however, when you view or you visualize the press, the majority of the press, particularly, but also TV and radio, you say they've done it, they say they are doing it. But really, when you actually look at the signs that they should be showing that that is really happening. Well, they don't exist in most of the cases. It doesn't exist. Why? Why? Because they don't have the elements that a transformation needs. A transformation, we could call it a digital transformation. This is no longer fashionable. Well, any other transformation. A transformation, in fact, needs 5 elements. I think it's 7, in fact, but it needs a vision that they don't have. You often ask the media, what is the vision? What do you want to do? What is the objective? They've lost it. They don't know where to sell newspapers, the business model. Of course, that's not the aim. For years, you wanted to change the world. You wanted to educate. You wanted to control power. Those are they're not there. And then the skills, abilities, particularly in conventional media, they've been lost, they're not there, and the talent also has escaped. When I worked in the media years ago, it was attractive to work in the media because there were people who came who wanted to work with us. When El Mundo was set up, when El País newspaper, people wanted to work there. Young people wanted to work there, but now young people just want to work, but not in the media. If they want to work in Google, Facebook, or other places that are more attractive now. Anyone who wants to tell a story now, the newspaper is not so attractive. I'm not saying that it's not at all, but it's not as attractive as it was before. There's also a lack of incentives in these organizations. People you don't know why they have to change. You come to an organization which for 40 years has been selling newspapers successfully, manufacturing a newspaper successfully. You have to tell those people that they have to change. Change what for? Well, it's difficult for them culturally because they've done something well, and they've always been told that you've done well. Now you don't know anything about it. You come and see that you're doing bad. And some people come from Silicon Valley and tell you that you're doing badly, and they don't understand it. They don't have incentives. And furthermore, and this is the next point, they don't have any resources because they spent them over these years, or they've done a bad management or bad business. They can't even have those economic advantages, and so radio, TV, newspapers have cut down staff, and talent obviously doesn't want to go to somewhere where there's a bad atmosphere. They don't pay you and there isn't innovation. Well, thank you and goodbye. But this does not look like the most attractive industry, it seems, but they don't have action plans generally either, so everything is a question of playing with another place of the project. Some people know how to work with a project, they know how to make a project, they know how to write down a project or document a project, but you come to a newspaper, however, and people continue as we did 20 or 25 years ago with occurrences. It's occurred to me that people would like this, or it's occurred to me that, or this. Where do you get that from? This intuition served us in other times for certain things when we were alone, but intuition alone is not enough because you need, and this is another matter where I think that the media, unlike other industries, haven't looked at, and this has come out also in the conversation, do not look at people. They don't look at the people. The media that give an offer. I think that people want that. They think, but do you really know who the people are? There's a story that I always tell about El País. I think it's amusing because it's a good example. But in El País, there's a reader drawn by a very good Spanish painter from the 70s, and there's a person who's lying on a city reading El País with an old jacket and corduroy trousers, but not a hipster, but this would be an intellectual of that age. And when somebody said to me, I believe in the readers, and I look at that, and I wanted to cover it because he is still a reader, but readers nowadays are different, and he's not the reader. So in this generic idea of readers that the press has in the world, this is not a problem in our country. It's in Mexico, and even the New York Times, although the New York Times communicates better, and also because it's the New York Times, we're all fascinated by what the New York Times does. But we only look what they do well. But this is a problem in the sector. Who do we look at? Because there are many things. Because to look at outside the sector, the people who do good narratives is not necessarily in the media. Who does the best designs or the best stories are not told generally by the media. It's not general. Of course, there are exceptions. There are things that are being done well, and they're good professionals. But the final result really is not there. And let's now go on to the other subject. Because I said that there were 2 more elements that are missing, and these are creativity. Well, nobody dares do anything. where you see new things outside the media, but you see the media 2 days later, they copy what Facebook, they copy what Twitter do, or later they wanted to do their own Twitter. So give it a try at least, and they're not trying. What they think they're trying are things that in fact were done 3 or 5 years ago, when the New York Times comes with a famous snowfall. I'm sorry for those of you who are not journalists, so that was really a milestone. They did a special called Snowfall. You can look for it. And you've got it in just 3 faculties in all the theses, and all the journalists quote that is the narrative of the future, the Snowfall special, which is just a landing base as marketing people, multimedia, one thing moves, okay, well, they did it in marketing years ago, and the name itself, parallax pages, and the name comes from the people in video games. That is the model of a narrative. That's called a parallax in video games, in the video games world. But journalists discovered that when the New York Times made a page like that. Well, congratulations, you 5 years late, you got there, you're still thinking that you're doing it well. Well, that's great, but not to be excessively critical. I'll be very brief, and with this I'll finish. And this is the other element that I'd like to talk about, which I think is the core of the matter, which is credibility and trust. And indeed, trust. I think Didier forgot that in that list where we can be at the bottom, there were some that are very important apart from the bankers and the press, and that's the politicians. Well, in that ranking where the journalists are, perhaps it is those 3, that ranking is very important. Why? Because the press was never in that ranking before they went into that ranking a few years ago, and you could see that in the social movements. The only people who didn't see it was the press itself. When 11M occurred or other movements arose in other countries, in the posters, in the streets, in the signs, they said bankers, politicians, and press. In the protest banners here in Puerta del Sol in Madrid, but anywhere, also in Brazil, when there are citizens' movements, they go against certain TVs because they consider them to be guilty. In fact, there's a very famous comic in Spain which represents these 3 elements in a fantastic orgy. They've been in this orgy for years, but destroying everything they can and outside what's really happening. Because that is the secret where this is happening, and the media that partly have been attacked because they've been disseminators and creators of fake news. Now it seems that they are the Virgin Mary and they've never done anything. They're pure and clean, and they are guilty of fake news. They're stealing their talent, and they're called Facebook. But no, let's have a look. Within the media, there are tons of Facebooks, and you just have to look at the North American TV stations in order not to quote anyone in particular or annoy it, but you can come to your own conclusions. But it's full of creators of fake news, with one difference: not even fake. They don't even know how to do fake news well, because a journalist believes that by doing fake news, you try to do it by trying to be truthful and telling the truth. The more you lie or simulate, the better. The more you sophisticate the truth. Well, the lie dressed up as the truth. So the better the disguise, the better. That's not true. The lie does not need to disguise itself. A lie circulates as the truth because it has to do with people's feelings. There's a joke that says, "Why did you believe that?" Well, because it's the same as what I think. That's how fake news works. You don't need to have artificial intelligence that simulates the statements made by Obama or whatever. You don't need to do that. It's very simple, really. The Trump memes are photos of Greece from 8 years ago with capital letters saying "my," and with the adolescent daughter, and this man is destroying. Saying that those who believe it, they don't need to perceive it. But this is another element of a change with what is probable, possible, and believable. And the journalists participate. Insist there are exceptions, of course. But then logically we come, and forgive me because I don't want to talk for too long, but I'll finish. Obviously the business model, which has a lot to do with this, is taking the seriousness, the credibility is deriving to other models like the conversation or yours or others. And of course many of these investigations in recent years, which was the territory of traditional newspapers, of televisions and so forth, if you analyze it in any country, now they brought them out in these international consortia, in the media, and here in Spain we have an example. If you remember, if you recall the most recent economic and political scandals that have come up in the press, 8 out of 10 probably have read them, and they were probably originated in a digital medium. And this is a thought for the conventional press more than for the media generally, because journalism still has a function, that's obvious, but it seems that it's changing its place and its form. That's it. Anyone, any reaction from this diagnosis from the panel? I would like to just add something to what you were saying. The big media groups are the only big enterprises where there isn't a research and development service. It is very rare to find research and development services in the media. So in recent years, research and development has come from the technological supply or offering, or what is offered by the platforms. For example, Snapshot said, make some stories on Snapshot. So the media said, yeah, we'll do some stories on Snapshot. But it's not the media that decided, it was the technology that decided. And why? Because very few media groups have cells for research on media. They are waiting for innovation, and innovation comes from outside. It's coming from outside, and the media are always running behind this in order to get the latest technology, whilst I think today that what is of interest is that there is, that is what you were saying, you have to slow down. We have to slow down in order to do the work well, in order to really explain. Slow down because the aspect of trust, just as the last point really, where does it come from, this loss of trust? It comes from the anxiety with when we face the world's big problems. Because when we're in a world which is secreting anxiety or anguish, we have many ways of reacting. There's a cognitive reaction which pushes us to fear everything and to lose trust, and so therefore we have to rebuild trust by going beyond these cognitive assets. In other words, by explaining, and explaining that takes time. And the second expertise is the expertise of method. Why is it important to share the expertise of researchers? Because they have a method of investigating which is interesting, which is called the scientific mind or the critical mind. And today we need that critical mind. With people who mistrust everything, we need people who calmly look at the reality with a critical mind. And there, the media, the journalists have a role to play by providing elements, contributing elements in order to help that critical mind. But I think that today we are in a system of fear with the complexity that we're facing, but where there's something that really has to be done, but calmly, taking our time, quietly, because that is what we're working on. Noemi. In your contribution, I know the work you've done in the product team, when you were referring to collaboration, you were also referring to collaboration with the platforms on the innovation. After what Mario has said and after what Didier has said about the lack of research for the development of product within the media, do you agree with what is your experience? And if you agree, what is the solution? and also from going from what is anecdotal to what could be a little bit of the solution for the industry.
Sure. Indeed. There's a lot of talk about innovation, about R&D, and I think that I think first we have to define what we mean by innovation and what we mean by R&D, because it's not the same thing. But the investment capability, the investment you need to take on major projects that are sustainable over time in a line of work that requires R&D, at present, the funding you need is significant. And the situation that we find ourselves in, the media as a whole, in general, the media as a whole, the situation at present for us, putting up with this perfect storm, plus the structural crisis, structural crisis of the sector, and the economic crisis, which has also hit us very hard. And this has led to a big change in consumption patterns. And as you said, relationship with the big companies, big companies that gradually have lost that relationship that they once had with baseline readers. So what I mean here, what I meant with collaboration then is, from my point of view, I think is necessary, very much necessary, so we have some muscle power to take on certain initiatives to help us jointly, from a joint point of view. So the big platforms that are way ahead of us in everything related to analysis, behavioral analysis, be able to study, profile, and segment the different types of readers, archetypes. I might even agree with you in this regard. If at any point in time it made sense to talk about that particular reader, you change the name of the reader or the reader of the New York Times or Bais here. I think that never made sense. But now, in the old creative minds of the media, the reader of a headline is that loyal reader that we're now trying to re-engage, to seduce. But the digital reader, despite everything we're saying here, the way they're placing us in a situation that despite the crisis, we still have a greater ability to reach out and find new readers. But to find these new readers and discover new readers in environments that are so fragmented, where the audience is so highly fragmented, this requires significant technical capability to be able to identify those communities, those niche communities that we can reach out with an editorial proposal, differentiated proposal, to enable us somehow recover that credibility, that relationship with that reader baseline that gradually has been dissipating. So why is it important to work with platforms? Because working with platforms, and I've been working with them in the past 4 years, quite directly actually, and there's one thing they're really good at. Normally we refer to the platforms, the large platforms, just pinpoint at them certain things, and to blame them for all our problems, all our woes. And that's, in a way, it's true. But they're really good in product development in a collaborative manner within their own companies. So the new ways of working, of bringing in systems of creation, of product concept, of sitting around the table, different profiles, perfectly different profiles that can contribute with new ideas. Instead of us brainstorm to provide us with a number of elements and ideas and things that is foreign to us. For example, performance. Or performance is an indicator that up until recently in the media was only really measured at technology level, and in really deep technology systems, what we call system, the guys that do the functional architecture, the operational architecture, and they're monitoring, well, whether the page is a bit up or down, whether we're being attacked by hackers, what is the ratio of readers that we have in such a whatever, etc. Performance is a constant that the big platforms have and measure. This is not a KPI. It's not a technological KPI. It's a business KPI. Again, it's a business KPI because existing research tells you that when a user spends more than 3 seconds waiting for a page to upload, that user, you lose that reader. They lose it. And as an owner of the product, you get feedback on that. And you say, right, we just lost a reader because he was fed up of waiting 3 seconds, or because you're taking too long to download the headline, or other calls to advertising they're trying to download, etc. So what does this mean? That you have to work from the business and from the product transversely in the whole thing to improve your performance. And how do you work on performance? Well, working jointly within when you develop the project, in your digital project, with the developers, with designers, with bearing in mind constantly the user experience. And when you manage to reduce those download times, you see how traffic improves, and basically the distribution channels improve in the social media through search engines, which are really channels for bringing in audience, which you have to work with them. You have to develop a loyalty scheme with them. So obviously there's room for improvement. There's room for experimenting as well. Initiatives such as download formats for mobiles that we say are Google, but were actually developed in Europe in collaboration with the media. It was developed here in Europe, and this has become, in the end, a component, an element that's standard. That now, when we look for information in Google, the page that we've downloaded, I mentioned, well, the search engine, whichever, that the media uses is optimized. It's an optimized page that you download to be consumed from a mobile device. Could the media have done this? Could the media have done that by themselves? Could we have done that by ourselves? Very unlikely. Very likely not, because if there's one thing we do know, is that in the digital world, in digital environment, I know it's a cliche, but it's really an ecosystem in which a lot of stakeholders exist. So we need to find ways, formulas to help us develop jointly sustainable environments and to guarantee the independence and sustainability of the media, news media. Right, well, there's very strong arguments there for collaboration with platforms, internal collaboration, and again, collaboration with the media. Okay. Okay, so we have a number of fields open here for discussion, but I think we should give our audience, an opportunity for a question, or any clarification, or anything new they might want to, any point they might want to raise. So we open it to discussion. Otherwise, we can carry on talking ourselves. A question over here? Do we have a microphone?
Sí.
Just a thought here, because it seems like it's all about relationships, isn't it? With the platform, with the readers, with the media, a confidence of trust, which in the end, what drives internet. But beyond the digital side of things, I'm thinking on television, for example. I wanted to talk about on journalism for common good. I'm surprised how the large communication groups are not committed or interested in the common good, information on social side of things. I see that television platforms, in the end, nobody is committed nobody's testing for the risk. We all go for the simple, easy thing. If there's a product such as a program that cheap, inexpensive, banal product, they're committed to that. They commit to that in prime time. but they're not really risk-taking by the media. And I think the user does want that. The viewer wants that. If you want a program in TV5, for example, just to mention one, why do other channels, TV channels, I mean, smaller ones, why don't they commit to other programs with other information with more value? What are, I don't know, social schemes, programs are doing? It's just very linear. Obviously, they're also, I think the users is demanding that, but it's all very much driven also by advertising, isn't it? But it's also interesting to know what's happening in social entrepreneurship, for example, which a lot of young people are engaging in, and senior too, other people. Themes, offline, digital, and television, or printed press, a lot of stuff that is not shown in the press or in the media anywhere, which I think is for the common good, and it's not there because it's risky, and then people are not taking risk in this regard. So, does anyone want to take on that question? Well, I agree with you, if I may, but I think there's one element there that exists, and there's interest in that, and that does exist, in fact. So I think some who are taking ownership of some of those areas, and that's controversial, one of the brands are taking ownership on that. The brands are now dedicating resources to produce what television, press, radio would have done in the past. They're doing that in Spain. There's plenty of examples in Spain and across the world. It's called brand content. In education, for example, I know the issues and problems that we find, for example, anything within the field of education is produced by a bank, distributed by a journal, by a newspaper, but produced by a bank. So they're investing resources. These are private companies investing resources. They are companies, surprisingly. And they're taking on the risk because there is social demand for this. So it's not a problem it's not the question that doesn't exist. They're addressing points that may be more controversial. And they're obviously not going to pay a war correspondent elsewhere to report on that. But it's interesting because part of that field that you're talking about is being taken on, is being occupied by private companies because they believe, on the one hand, is a way of improving their own credibility, their own trust in their company. But surprisingly, they're pushing aside the professionals, and they're doing it with them. They're doing it with our mechanics, with our systems. It's not advertising; it's interviews. It's a documentary, and they're really well produced. Some of them, surprisingly well produced, and surprisingly independent. Quite a few of them. So when you look at news, it's not so social perhaps, but maybe news and technology. It's probably the bank that's producing the best news on that and up to that, and that used to be journalism. Now, again, sustainability. There's a lot of information, very interesting information, up to date, avant-garde. Covering different aspects of industry. Why they're not doing it? Probably from what Noemi mentioned earlier, the resources are being depleted. There are no resources left. And the way of doing it is to continue to use your ability, your distribution capability. Okay, you know how to do content. You do the content. I can still distribute, and so they agree on that. But yes, I do agree with what you're saying, and it's quite surprising how the function, that role or part of that role is elsewhere now. It's not within our press.
This links up with something that you mentioned in your presentation, and also Didier. Also, perhaps you can add something to that about the journalism of solutions and constructive journalism. It's particularly complicated. Investigative journalism, the subjects that you were describing before are very complicated and hard subjects. Majority of the results are negative and the stories are negative, but you do that, and like others in the industry, you also look for the construction using the same abilities and skills as journalists in order to find who did it badly, in order to also find who does it well from the point of investigative journalism. And tell us, how can you do solutions journalism, and Didier also, you do it from the conversation, but also before in your career, you were a stalwart of the journalism of solutions, and how do you go from a story to the structural change, and what is the value of constructive well, just a very little definition of what we could call constructive journalism or journalism of solutions. Then I'd like to give the floor to Rachel, because this is impact journalism, which is more powerful. The solutions journalism is real journalism. In other words, it means sharing. I've done it in Libération and Le Monde, to share good best practices, good practices, something that gives solutions, but which is carried by an association, NGO, and so forth, or by something within a country which is not known, and make give the expertise, to ask experts to say what it's, and then to share it, and that is the journalism of solutions, the fundamental. And then there's the constructive journalism, because it's a little bit further. In other words, it says here's a certain number of clues which could lead to legislation changes and so forth. But what I would like to ask Rachel is, for example, I live in the countryside with vineyards which are full of pesticides, with people who fall ill. The sickness is the common good. Health is the number one common good. So who's going to talk about that? Who's going to talk about that? You.
So I think we have to be, I just want to take a step back, I think we have to be really careful about talking about the crisis in the media, because actually we're in a golden age of media. We have more readers than ever before. What the platforms have done is not stolen our readers, they've given us way more readers. They've just worked out how to take the money, and we haven't worked out how to keep some of the money and build some of the money. So I think it is really important that we bring this innovation and attract all the great smart thinking into our industry beyond just being good journalists. We've got to bring them into the business, we've got to bring them into research, innovation, product development. But as journalists, as Didier was saying, we've also got to work out how we can better build trust with our readers, how to regain that trust. And definitely investigative journalism, solutions journalism, impact journalism is one of those ways, because we live in a very, very complex, complicated, multi-layered, multi-interconnected world today. And we also live in a 24/7 world. So the newspapers are obsessed with and are taken up with trying to report what is happening now. But the readers really want to understand better what is happening now. And it's this slow down, more explanatory journalism, which is actually the type of journalism that's going to engage our readers. It's, you know, you have a look at how long people spend on pages. On news, they read the headline, they read the first 2 paragraphs, and then they think they've got it, or they've got it from Twitter. The pieces they stay on, and the pieces that keep them on the papers, are the big investigations, or the big explaining pieces, or the big solutions journalism. Those, the type of work that helps their audience to really understand what's going on, why pesticides are being used, why they're causing problems, you know, what's the impact of antibiotic resistance, why should we stop giving so many antibiotics to animals, the influence of Russia. You know, it's one thing to say they're influencing, but why, how, what the techniques being used. So all these big, heavy subjects that, unless we as journalists sort of start to slow down and start to understand the importance of impact, investigative, explanatory solutions journalism, and give more of that to our readers, we're also in danger of losing our readers and sort of, you know, continuing to lose the trust.
¿Alguna otra pregunta?
Any other question?
Hola, buenas tardes. La experiencia.
Okay, so I'm going to make the most of the talent sitting there to ask our speakers. Now, in line with everything that you've been discussing now, in internet, if internet is characterized by the loss of that disintermediation, because the media have been really intermediary between reality and people when they start retelling things that happen in society, telling the news. So I wanted to ask you, how do you think that the media, how do you believe that the media, as an institution, beyond the company, but as an institution, how can they survive? As a journalism, per se, how can they survive, as Madrid was saying, against those that, against vis-a-vis those that have the resources that are bringing or buying all the talent to make content, information, journalism? It's not the media doing it. How can we ensure that the media, a medium, which in theory is the guarantor, ensures that journalism is for common good and not just branded content? How can you do it? How will they do it? How will they manage to continue to do proper journalism, even though they don't have the muscle, the economic muscle, to support themselves? They don't have the talent, the adequate talent, or they're losing the talent to develop a product to enable them to deliver that. So what guarantee do we have as a society that tomorrow we'll be telling ourselves things through journalism for common good and not journalism for marketing and journalism of brands? How can we do that? How are we going to do it if we don't have the resources, we have the business model, the funds, and we're just becoming mere distributors? And tomorrow, maybe not even that. How long will it take before Netflix starts doing journalism, gets into this field? When do the banks, insurance companies will start doing this journalism in their websites or what have you? And where will the common good lie in the end? So some thoughts on that. Okay, good question. It's a very good question in line with everything we're talking about here. I would add another point there that we can also link up with disinformation, that the disintermediation has also driven fake news and all those, everything related to that. Noemi has given us some very good examples, and she's spoken about collaboration, when the platforms work, they work really well and they develop products, but disintermediation is a fact. How do we manage that for a journalism for common good? And perhaps Didier?
I'm very optimistic. In other words, in France, for example, where everybody thinks that the media are bad and rotten and so forth, there's never been as many journalism students as we have now. There are 40 journalism schools in France. When I go to those schools, I can see people who are very motivated by the common good. It's a new generation that's coming in. And secondly, also, they're very motivated by the common good, but not at all motivated by what we did before. We said, you're going to go into big media groups. No, they want to be their own media. They want to launch their own media. They want to be 3 or 4 and start up their own media. I think that nowadays we're at a moment in time in which, with the old traditional media, which are disseminators, more broadcasters, as you would say in bad French, broadcasters. So we have many little media, and that is, which in my opinion, that is what makes me optimistic, because around me at least, I can see the flowering of many media initiatives which start from the search for the common good. So, but it's not happening in the big media. Perhaps the big media will recover a certain number of these little startups and so forth within their groups in order to broadcast them first. But in any case, there is a will of doing journalism. Why? Because by using all the resources of IT in order to be more efficient, to build collaborative networks, to work together. Nowadays it's easy, for example, to work to do a collective, a group of journalists in a country who are not in the same regions, simply by working together permanently, because we have those webs or networks, to use those networks, using that technology in order to be more efficient, to be on site, to be on many sites at the same time. And that is all that makes me pretty optimistic about this. Obviously, there are more and more there's more native advertising and brand content and so forth, but of course we can live with that. We know that that exists, but I really find that the initiative is coming back. In any case, that young journalists that come out of the journalism schools, and they know that they are not going to go into a world in West France or the Express, they're not going to get in immediately because there isn't a job there. There aren't jobs there. So instead of saying, what should we do? We're going to be unemployed. They're going to get together and make new media. That is something to examine closely, and I think that it's something that is quite positive, I find.
I'm optimistic too, as I said in the beginning. I think we're moving away from the entrenchment of 5 years ago to a more looking beyond. We are attracting more innovation into our industry, and people care. You look at the Washington Post that was bought by Jeff Bezos. He is one of the richest men in the world. He's one of the biggest innovators of the world. He felt that the media industry and the newspaper, the Washington Post, needed help and needed his investment, and that has transformed that newspaper. But also, I'm optimistic because the platforms need us. Google will disappear if they don't have good content. Fake news is not good for either Facebook or Google. They are starting to work with the media industry to start to help, because they've started to understand that they need to help the media industry to come up with these innovations, to try and find ways to innovate and monetize, which is something we have to do. And I also think it is really important that the new generation, there are so many journalism schools in the UK now and across Europe. We're seeing so many really talented students that are coming through those schools and that are coming to organisations like ours at a very young age who don't want to be the journalists just reporting the sort of red carpet film reviews. They want to do good public interest journalism. I think there is a real understanding that if we don't have this mission-driven public interest journalism in the world, then we lose a cornerstone of our society.
Noemi?
Pues yo, por no cambiar la tónica,
Well, yeah, it's very much in line with that, and based on this description, to say that I'm also optimistic, although currently the situation is not good for the media, but I am optimistic for the reasons that my colleagues have just mentioned, but also because the current indicators show that, well, we have to take into account the current indicators. I would rather look more carefully or notice how The Guardian has been able to bring in 1 million people, and whether they can or not, whether they can or cannot open, read the content. There's many people that are contributing for the success of their media, so people can read it. It's not generalized, but there's a few examples that are beyond the New York Times and Washington Post. This is media that have been able to build a business model that has enabled them to maintain their independence and sustainability. Is it easy? No, it's not. The context is difficult, and that's what we have to take. That's the situation. But you either give up altogether, or you consider that you have a role to play in the development of democratic societies. Like, personally, and I believe that's the role of journalism, so you have to continue to explore and make progress. Is it branded journalism? Of course it is. We call it branded content now, and it used to be called, had a different name in the past. Certain fields are being taken on and used and employed by brands to transfer, improve their top of mind, improve their brand image as well. Yes, they're doing it. What can we do, however? We can reach out to a large volume of people. That's why the platforms want us. But that's why the brands also want us. Now, taking it beyond that, there are projects that perhaps are not so well known. Let me talk about, for example, Planeta Futuro. That connects with the question, the future planet that we had. I'm sorry, the question you asked for earlier. I don't remember your name. You're talking about sustainability. The most important project of sustainability in Spain, in Spanish language, is in El País. It's called Planeta Futuro, and is supported of the Belinda Gates Foundation. So clearly, the media are interested in committing to quality journalism, in committing to a common service journalism, a journalism that joins people, not to divide people, and to commit to something that's really what we've always had to do. What hasn't really changed? What has changed is the environment and the context, and that's where we are sort of redefining ourselves. But we don't want to lose our essence, do we? Well, I'm not. I'm the black duck. I'm not optimistic. Not optimistic. I'm pessimistic or realistic. So as the joke says, I do think there's some elements there in schools and in universities. I do see that, but there's also a dreaming end of it, a dreamer end of it. I've seen it, but that doesn't appear to coincide or agree with the things I'm seeing now, with the media I see now. So it's frustrating. And disengagement, if it's the first year, year 2, 3, and 4, especially, I hope it's different in France. French universities are different than Spanish university, because it's still teaching 19th century journalism, or maybe the first 3 quarters of the 20th century. And I'm worried about that. I'm concerned about that, because we know we have to retrain people. When I worked in the Prisa or El País, we had to retrain people, especially the recent graduates coming in from the schools of journalism. We had to retrain them. I'm worried about it. I do hope that other universities in other countries are different in that approach, but most of the universities in Spain, there's always an exception, of course. I'm sure there's an exception here or there, but it's difficult to see that there's a way out, because this is a university of nostalgia, isn't it? The journalism that was wonderful, that was really good. I'm old, by the way, but I never knew that journalism. It was always been very difficult to do investigative journalism. It was difficult to close the day's paper, but that golden era journalism, I never saw it or knew it. But I worry about what we teach at schools. Having said that, I do see a glimmer of hope in that there's IT components where things have been confusing. I think, as we mentioned here, how you develop the credibility. That's your value, isn't it? That's the value of journalism today, yesterday, and tomorrow. And in building that credibility is not so expensive. Developing is not expensive, but we just lost track, haven't we, within technology in a fascinating manner. The way when there's a change, a big IT change, a technological change, the first print shop were technologists, weren't they? Because they knew how to control the ink, the lead letters, everything, until it sort of trickles down to everyone. So innovation, we spoke about innovation. Of course, there's key innovation, there's multi-million in pouring into innovation, but there's also innovation in creativity and imagination. And I always give a good example. Fernando Vidal is a top chef in Spain who changed an industry, worldwide industry, from a restaurant up in the middle of a little corner in Spain. You had to go to this village up in Catalonia. And he transformed the industry, the global industry, with a group of cooks or chefs. With no investments, he transformed global gastronomy. He changed it. And he didn't do it with a lot of money. He did it through imagination, with a lot of hard work, trying to find different ways, different things. We imitate, but we don't try to differentiate. And when you imitate, when you copy, in the end, you're competing for the leftovers of cash because you're not seen as different. And that's the real battle. And I think there's genuine people here. We always give examples of philanthropy. We end up relying on philanthropy as the only model. And philanthropy, of course, is dangerous in itself because they also have their own limits. And more so in Spain, where it actually doesn't work, it doesn't operate, it doesn't work in a way that you see in the United States or the UK. In Spain, it's limited. They're still trying to approve the parliament, who knows what project, bill, that's still, goodness, who knows. So all the problems of journalism, taking into account what you were saying, in the US and Europe, there are problems in journalism that we think that is even the poor situation that we have now, we see it as a rich man's problem. I'm in the board of, in the journalism board, and there's projects in Spain that we subsidize that are so simple and so just for like protecting a journalist in a country, in any country in Africa or in America, protecting them, so because their neighbors don't want him or want her living next to them. We have some projects that are just helping them in personal security. Sometimes we forget some of these issues that we have that are just as important, like we have in the first world. And some projects are simple as this. It's not because the government is after them. The neighbors are stoning them. They don't want them there because they regard this person to be a risk for their own families. It's just to give you a different context of how some things often that's part of journalism too. And journalism is worldwide and it's global. Journalism is global, isn't it? I want to have good, solid information from Mexico and from Spain. And I am optimistic there, and I do agree with Didier here, because there is education. That's the only hope. Sorry, vocation. There's vocation. There's talent there, because a lot of people fighting for the common good. And I hope we get enough innovation and creativity so this changes. So this change is brought about. There's a lot of micromedia today that we don't know about them. We don't see them because the big trees have made a lot of noise when they collapsed. Then the small bush that's growing. All we see is the big forest, the big trees. Well, your business model is, well, what is the business model? Like the train, where we thought the train was going to disappear because the highways came about, toll roads and cars. And people were looking for a new way out for trains and how to speed them up. The solution, that wasn't the solution. We were looking in the right place, were we? I think in journalism, we're finding that there are little solutions there that bring peace of mind, but they're too weak. The small innovations here and there, they're so fragile, it brings peace of mind, and it's encouraging, but I am worried about it because it's very small. You know what I mean? No, I don't want to be the last one here. Yes, the last one. There's another component that we haven't addressed, by the way, which is the relevancy point is of local information, which does help you to strengthen that information ties with your loyal reader. In the U.S., this has been it's in an area that was hit hard by the crisis, and I believe there's an opportunity there to recover that trust and that credibility through local information and through identifying the interests, the local interests of those communities, of those readers, beyond the global coverage. And that's it. But not the last one, please, not for me. Okay, so we're past 90 minutes. Very quick question over here.
Muchísimas gracias.
Well, thank you very much for your contributions, all of you. I think it's been spectacular and very interesting indeed. And since we're out of time, I just want to say, well, I think that I've done investigative journalism for 20 years, and the biggest problem that we might have now is that people are not able, with statistics in your hand, of differentiating. I agree with Rachel that fake news or false news, it's a tragedy to adopt that term because it is giving veracity to that. They're lies. and the jokes, and people aren't able to distinguish what is true and what we saw Bolsonaro, Trump's victory. We've seen the danger of extreme right and extreme left populisms. Doesn't matter. So the question that I have is complicated, but can you see a solution? How can people differentiate people who want to get in? How can they differentiate? Because if you get something through WhatsApp and they change your videos, it is more and more difficult. How can they differentiate hoaxes and true news? I'm not as optimistic, but I hope that there is room. Rachel, Didier, one of you two, please.
I think media literacy is one of the big dangers as we move forward. It's fine for our generation. We know we have these brands. We know which are the brands that produce good journalism and trust. But what about my children who haven't grown up with newspapers on their breakfast tables, who've grown up with their screen and they are given news by their friends? That's how they interact with news. And Twitter, Facebook, as journalistic news organizations, we can interact with those. WhatsApp, Instagram, they're way harder for us to interact and to build our brands in those spaces. And goodness knows what's going to come next. So media literacy is really hard. And I think it goes back to this big word, trust. We have to build the trust in our brands. I think The Guardian is doing really amazing things. It has gone from a broken paper making huge losses to a paper now that is going to break even, that has 1 million readers paying for it. So it has built a huge level of trust with its readers, and it's built this brand, and it's built that. And if it can continue to do that, and other newspapers and other media organizations can do that, it will help with media literacy. The only answer to this problem of lies and fake news is more reporting, truthful reporting, and strong brands.
Des marques,
brands or labels or certificates. I don't know how we could say this, but there are a certain number of initiatives currently, Reporters Without Frontiers and so forth, who launch labels, in other words, that they study the media who produce information in order to try to classify, to say this is, you can trust. I'm not saying that that is the solution, but in any case, if we manage to mobilize enough communities around these labels, around these certificates, credibility certificates, this is one way, because brands give the trust to the Guardian. We trust the Guardian, we trust the New York Times. In the United States, if you're a voter or if you're a reader of Trump, you don't trust the New York Times. But, well, in any case, there is trust in the New York Times. But what about the others? For the others, you have to try and find exterior means of expertise or quality control. And all of these things are things that are being done. It's not just one solution, but it's being done, and I think it's interesting to follow this, because one day this will give us something, but there's a little bit everywhere. There are people who are trying to say, how can we get stamps or labels, and to say we can trust this. But look at it, I think it's worthwhile. And I think you've been talking about credibility and the trust of the public with the media that they consume, not the credibility in general, which is such a big and complicated subject. It is the credibility that you have in the media that you consume, the trust in the brand that you consume. Well, thank you very much, all of you, for being with us more than 90 minutes. Thanks to you, the panelists. Thank you, Telefónica once more, and the Conversation Spain. Thank you.